So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, John, for speaking. It's great to have you here. So John Clark is the co-founder of Canada's largest neutral MSP, Contrax and Connex's VMS technology. John Clark has 15 years experience in the staffing industry and is a staffing industry analyst top 40 under 40 recipient for 2020. John has designed, built, and managed contingent workforce and permanent hire programs for hundreds of clients in North America, from 1 to 100 million in staffing agency spend. John is focused on driving improvements on how clients engage with the staffing agencies and passionate about bringing VMS technology to clients of any size. Good luck with your presentation today, John, and thank you again for speaking.
Thank you, Alex. So thanks everyone for joining. So today I just wanted to give you an overview of some of the trends that we are seeing within the VMS space, specifically around how agencies are using VMSs or clients are pursuing the need for a VMS. So from my perspective, I've been in this industry a long time, owned a staffing company in Toronto, own an MSP company and a VMS company. So we see a lot of trends within the market. And right now, the biggest thing that we're seeing is clients just really driving their vendors for more automation, more reporting, more consolidation. So I wanted to talk today about what the VMS market looks like and how that's evolved, and then really talk about potentially ways that agencies can participate in that space without actually being an MSP provider, but can really use it as a strategic angle for their business and bring this offering to their clients to add more strategic value. So really, I want to just quickly make sure everyone understands what a VMS is. I know quite a lot of you on the line today, so I definitely know that you know, but I'd like to just cover it to make sure we're on the same page, and really talk about some of the background and the history around the VMS industry and how we sort of got to the stage that we are today. The other thing we can touch on is really, as I mentioned earlier, what clients want right now. In the age of digital transformation, clients are pursuing the automation piece in every aspect of their business, and the staffing agency space is no different. And then really the main aspect of today is to talk about what that means for you guys. So if you own an agency or you work at an agency, how can you participate in that VMS space? And then finally, if you're going to pursue this, some of the things that I would recommend that you look out for when you're assessing a provider or a potential partner. So really, this is a simple one. What is a VMS? So VMS typically stands for Vendor Management System or Vendor Management Software, not to be confused with an MSP. Sometimes people confuse VMS for the actual service provider. And in the context of this conversation, the VMS will be centered around the actual technology piece. So really, a VMS is typically a procure-to-pay system that manages the entire life cycle, typically of contract labor, but there's really been an increase in the use of permanent hiring through agencies within a VMS. Really, these technologies were specifically designed to do exactly this, to manage staffing agencies. So although vendor is a catch-all term, the VMS industry is dominated by spend that is around staffing agencies. So a VMS should typically include the entire life cycle. So, you know, the requisition and approval, so how you post a job to your staffing agency network, how those agencies would propose candidates, all done through the tool, and then typically goes right through to invoicing. So how you submit the timesheets for approval, how the managers on the client side approve that time, and then how the invoice is issued through the system to give the client one consistent, consolidated format, everything in one place. And really the purpose of this is to give clients visibility, control, automation, ability to identify things like cost savings or opportunities for efficiencies. So there's a lot of text on this slide, but really just to give everyone a feel for how we ended up in this space within the VMS technology space. So really in the late 90s, the whole vendor on-site model or master vendor model really started to explode. And with that came multiple challenges. So the VMS technologies were really brought in to try and automate and capture as much of this as possible. And that was really the first sign. So I'm sure most of you know Fieldglass. So SAP Fieldglass, they were founded in 1999. One of the founders in this space and widely regarded as the largest. So really, they started officially around 1999. And in the early 2000s, it totally transformed this space completely. The industry completely changed, and then the MSP space grew dramatically. So the MSP environment started to grow, have a competitive process of multiple vendors that you can manage through a tool. Really, the focus originally was on the visibility, but heavily focused on cost savings. So as the MSP industry grew, the larger staffing firms realized that there was a huge play here, and they started to buy up all the independent MSPs. And most of the MSPs that you see today are owned or deeply affiliated with some type of staffing company. But as the industry evolved in this early to mid 2000s, again, very procurement focused, very cost saving, very consolidation focused, very basic principles based on what we see sort of relatively today. And the VMS reflected that. So late in 2007, 2008, the subprime mortgage recession, it caused a huge spike in our industry, widely regarded as a massive turning point in this space. The industry practically doubled within that period. And that was basically because companies had to cut really deep and really wide. And then when, as you guys know, that recession went on forever. So really, as they hired back, workforces wanted to remain much more agile, much more scalable. And what happened was HR had to become involved. More bodies in the building are from the contingent workforce or contract labor base. So you really had to have HR involved. And that's when it really kicked on. Now, in Canada, there was some very early adopters of the program like RBC and Accenture who had been participants in this space before that. But really everyone else who was enterprise type size or level, they had to get on board at this point. So as we got into the 2010s, there's a lot of mature programs around at this point. Again, like RBC, they were approaching a decade at this point, really early. And sometimes you lose a lot of that low-hanging fruit. So how many evolutions of maturity can you really go through within this space? There's only so much juice you can squeeze, right, from an efficiency perspective. So really, it was the next evolution. The VMS technology started to become bigger and better. Fieldglass sold to SAP, like huge changes in this market. And then all of the enterprise companies started to look for the next wave, which started to be around SOW or scope of work or any type of time, non-time and materials sort of contingent workforce. So as the 2010s grew, the gig economy and the whole Fiverr, Upwork type environment, even Uber and things like Skip the Dishes to a certain extent, the whole gig economy piece started to really grow. Trending towards 2020, 50% of the workforce widely regarded as being sort of gig economy, non-traditional, contingent at this point. So within that, it became much more challenging to manage all these different dynamics of the contingent workforce. The sort of branding or the tagline total talent management started to really grow. And that was looking at all your sources of supply. It could be staffing agencies, it could be consulting firms, it could be temps or interns or offshore, and really look at it through one lens. And that's when HR really started to own these programs. Typically at the enterprise level, it should be a combination of HR and procurement. But HR are very heavily involved at this point. And as the VMS has tried to catch up and tried to evolve, they really kind of ran out of ideas. So from my perspective, there's a whole bunch of buzzwords and phrases like AI and machine learning, which really at this point don't truly exist. But the big guys tried to push the narrative. Quite honestly, my advice to clients is don't buy a Ferrari if you don't have a driver's license. So really, how much of this functionality are you going to lose? But as the VMS is trying to evolve as much as they can. So at this point, it really had been an enterprise type play. You have big, cumbersome, expensive contingent workforce or staffing agency spend. By this time, if you haven't done your program, you really should have. So where we see the biggest explosion from 2019 onwards is sort of the evolution of the mid-market. So mid-market being those non-enterprise companies or non-enterprise spend. So we have clients that are enterprise in nature, but they do not have enterprise spend. And at this point, it really is the evolution that VMS is available to everyone. And if you have 10 or 20 or 30 contractors, right up to tens of thousands. So these tools are becoming more agile, more simple, more accessible to everyone. And then the biggest trend I've personally seen in the last couple of years is those smaller mid-market companies looking to use the VMS for permanent hiring as well. So where does that leave us today? So right now, the global VMS market is worth about $179 billion. So that spend that goes through a VMS technology. The latest information is from 2020. The report came out last year, which captures all of 2019 data. So there was 5% growth in that space. And previously, that was the first non-double-digit year growth. However, you have to consider that all of the big programs, the really expensive, $1 billion or $500 million plus programs had been implemented at this point. So the market still grew, even though the big programs are already in place. So in 2019, the deals that were awarded, 73% of them were for clients that were using a VMS for the first time. So never had a VMS before. So again, that speaks to some of the growth in the market. And if you haven't done a VMS, you definitely are going to eventually, whether it's this year, next year, or 10 years, the market is trending in that direction. One of the interesting parts is people have the perception that enterprise only is suitable for VMS. The banks and the telcos in Canada, for example, the big consulting companies, putting in some massive global program, but really that's not true. The 57%, so the majority of contracts that were awarded in the VMS market are just for one country. So when you take the overall spend, 68% of that spend is programs that have spend of over 50 million. However, that is the total dollars that run through a VMS. In terms of number of programs, most of them are actually clients that spend less than $10 million. So that has been the biggest shift in this market, is people perceive that VMS technology is a super enterprise technology. If you have 50 million, 500 million plus type spend, but that is just simply not true. And that is where my passion is letting everyone know that a VMS is for everyone. You don't just need critical mass or huge spend to get there. And then the last point is that 32% of the VMS installs were with clients with less than 2,000 employees. So very suitable for the Canadian market. And a lot of the big guys in the VMS space have just not pursued the Canadian space. And I think that when we look at the mid-market, as we would call it, those smaller clients, that's definitely a mistake. So some of the key players within the industry, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of these, but I'm sure you guys have worked with some or all of these. I just wanted to call out the Canadian ones, of course. So full disclosure that Contrax does own Connexus, our own proprietary VMS. I'm sure most of you know or have heard of FlexTrack, and then a collection of others. And you look at companies like SAP Fieldglass or Beeline, and even Coupa, who are a procure-to-pay technology that do non-contingent workforce. They're all global powerhouse type companies. So one of the biggest things that I deal with day to day is really the need from clients that they want more. They want more from everything in their business. They want more automation, more centralization, more reporting, data, analytics. To go back to Mark's point earlier, like talking about what are the drivers for recruiters? It's time to fill, time to submit. How do you measure quality? I speak to clients, and the question I have is like, what's your turnover rate within temps? And 99% of them don't know it because you're working from spreadsheets with all these different vendors. So clients really have a need or a desire for the reporting and analytics piece. Huge desire around time entry and approval. If you think about it from a client's perspective, they might have 1 or 2 or 20 vendors doing things different ways, and some put invoices in weekly and some do monthly and some do every 2 weeks. Really complicated and tough for them. The other part is this company's still operating on paper timesheets. So they want something that is more auditable, easier, more streamlined, more automated. One of the biggest sort of benefactors of the VMS industry when you implement with a client is the finance team. Typically not the reason why you do it, but they tend to be the biggest supporters because you streamline the process. You have one standardized format of how you receive and pay invoices. And then the biggest change that I'm seeing also right now is the temp and perm consolidation. So again, VMSs historically have been for contract labor, but more and more of our clients, particularly the small to medium ones, they're using a vendor for perm and they're using them for temp. You don't want to have two different processes. So using a VMS for perm when people typically think it's just been from temp. So the other thing to consider is that clients are, as I mentioned earlier, like using the whole digital transformation. Like you've seen the explosion of Workday. Even from a time clock perspective, there's a ton of companies just, if you haven't done that, you're doing that now. So really everywhere across your business, there's no excuse to be operating on spreadsheets anymore. And that is what clients are aware of. And if you ask an HR person how many temps they had on site last year and they don't have that accessible through a VMS, it can be very painful to pull that information. So really some of the big drivers for clients. So where does that leave it from an agency perspective? So again, I think people perceive that VMSs are just for the MSP industry or for clients to use on their own, but we're trying to challenge that status quo to say, look, there's another way to do this. Like you don't have to implement an MSP. You don't have to manage this tool yourself. You should be asking for more from your vendors. And to give you guys an example, we closed about $30 million in spend in the last 6 months for clients that are using a VMS with an agency, not with an MSP or not managing it on their own. And then we have had 2 RFPs alone this year that have been for vendors. So looking for staffing agencies that can bring a VMS to the table. So something to consider is, why would an agency want to do this? It's because basically the clients want it. So you have to give them what they need. And if you don't, someone else will. The other factor is it makes you much stickier. If you can be a strategic partner, you can implement or bring with you a technology, it makes them much harder for them to get rid of you. So it makes you stickier and gives you better longevity with clients. The other part is that explosion of the mid-market I spoke about. So really, it is growing, and globally we have the data to show that. But within Canada, really the mid-market is completely underserved at the moment. That will change in the next 2 to 3 years. So again, a case of you want to evolve or die from an agency perspective, have a more strategic offering for your clients, but really focus on an area that is underserviced that will eventually do this. The other part is like if you take this to your clients, you're solving their pain. You're getting in there first. You're being the solution vendor. And every client's looking for more from their vendors. And the ones that bring those strategic solutions are the ones that typically do way, way better. It makes your ability to grow much easier. So you can get in with one client, again, making you stickier, but really the incentive for the client to use you more because you're bringing a technology, bringing a solution, bringing the automation and the consolidation with you. So really the clients that I would look for are ones that you have a large footprint, or whether you think that you're not receiving enough of the pie and you want to get much more. And again, this can just be for you to use as the vendor. It doesn't have to be for every vendor. And once clients taste the beauty of a VMS, they love it. The other thing is it's a huge differentiator in the market. If you take this to clients, there's not many agencies doing this right now, even though the clients are asking for it. So huge differentiator. And what we know is a very challenging and saturated market. The other thing to consider is you can use a VMS for your internal processes. So we have a lot of clients that are just staffing agencies that just use it internally. So they can have their clients post the jobs, they can post them for them, but really it helps with the time entry piece. It helps with the invoicing piece. It makes your life much easier and it makes the client's life much easier. And you can really choose to automate some or all of these parts. One of the misnomers around VMS is that it has to be this big, cumbersome, huge, enterprise-wide 6-month implementation, and that's simply not true. We've stood the VMS up for clients in 2 days. So you can pick which pieces you want to use and provide it to your clients. Also use it for internal use, based on what the need is with the client. So really, that's kind of the why would you do this as an agency. But the how is, for me, the key next step. So again, I would look for clients where you have deep relationships. So really leverage those. Like we all have a few blockbuster relationships. And then look for opportunities within those, or even clients where you have a large portion of spend, or you feel like you have decent percentage of the volume. It can help kick you over the line to get the rest. Really, for me, I would explore like what pain points clients are experiencing right now. Is it automation? Is it reporting? Is it time entry? Like I've been in client meetings where the HR person has turned up with a folder like 8 inches thick that's full of paper timesheets and invoices that are just wrong, and they have to manually audit. So really explore the pain points, not just from a recruitment perspective, but from a process perspective, or from a reporting or analytics perspective. The other thing is the pricing within the VMS industry is not expensive. So typically our vendors would bring this to the client at no charge. So the typical pricing is around 0.25 or 0.5 of 1%. So a quarter to half of a percent. So if you're operating at 35, 40, 45, 50, whatever percent markup, there's definitely some space in there to bring this to the client at no cost. And that tends to be the deal winner for most of our deals we sign directly and for our vendors. One thing you should do is explore other options within the VMS industry. Look at what's available, what kind of VMS options would suit. I don't see a lot of VMS technologies looking within the staffing agency space right now, again, even though the clients are desiring it. And then the other part is to explore how this potentially could help you internally. So a lot of vendors that we work with, we have over 1,500 vendors signed up with Contrax. A lot of them have very internal heavy processes, admin heavy processes, very cumbersome from an efficiency perspective. So look at ways that perhaps you don't have to implement it at a client fully, but you can give them access to things like time approval, automate some of those pieces to really take some of the burden off your back office. So some of the things when you're exploring that VMS market to look for would be no cost implementation. So some VMSs try to charge you for that, particularly if you're smaller in spend. So you should pursue VMS technologies that do not charge you for that setup piece. You should also assess how quickly they can stand you up. Some of the bigger, more cumbersome tools do take a lifetime, and they have sign-off for everything, and it's process flows and workflows. It can be very cumbersome, so just know what you're getting yourself in for in terms of how much work it's going to take you, how much engagement from the client is needed, and how much this whole thing is worth it. As I mentioned on the pricing, you should be paying somewhere in between 0.25 to 0.5. A lot of VMSs will try and charge you more for smaller clients, but that's sort of the going rate and what seems to be fair and reasonable. You should look for a technology where you can customize the workflow per client. So do they need approvals on timesheets? Do they need approvals when they post a requisition? Do they need cost centers, departments, divisions, etc.? So you should be able to customize that workflow when you do that installation. You should also have the ability where you do not rely overly heavily on the VMS. So they give you reporting and admin access, and then look for VMS technologies that have good customer service. The other part to consider is that you want to pick a vendor that is the right size for you. If you pick a VMS that's too big, you are way down the priority list in terms of service. And then lastly, one of the evolutions I mentioned is technologies that do temp and perm. So if you implement a smaller client, they would likely want to use you for permanent as well. So make sure you don't focus too heavily on the contract piece. So on that note, that is me. I just wanted to offer anyone to take a note of my email address here. If you wanted to see a living, breathing demo of an example, I can do this for you. We can walk you through what it looks like. It's much easier to see what the client would see and even how to sell it. So feel free to shoot me a note. We can set up a demo, walk you through what the entire process looks like. Again, most of you know this space really well and have definitely used the tool before. But from a client perspective, seeing that holistic view from posting a job right through to invoice may help you see some of the value. So yeah, feel free to shoot me an email, and yeah, we can set up the demo from there. So thank you very much, everyone. At this point, I would just open up the floor if anyone has any questions. No questions?
John, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Alex. So I'm not sure if you have any questions, but over to you.
Yeah, I was just coming on. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like there is any questions. If anyone does have any questions, feel free. There's the chat feature there on the right hand side, so you just type them in and hit enter. I'm not sure if maybe people didn't notice that the chat is on the session as well. But yeah, no, I just wanted to come back on and say thanks again for speaking. It was a really interesting presentation. And I see that you listed the how they can contact you to get a demo. Do you want to maybe put your LinkedIn in chat as well, or any other ways people can contact you maybe?
Yeah, I'm not difficult to find, but yeah, I can pull up my LinkedIn and throw that
Awesome.
in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you very much, Alex. So I'll put that in the chat right now.
Okay, great, awesome. And just to let everyone watching know, so our next session actually starts at 3 o'clock, so there's about 5 minutes left. But yeah, thanks again, John. It was a really interesting presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.